At 6:17 that morning, my wife texted, "Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Emma wants her real father." I read it twice, set my coffee down on the counter I'd installed myself 16 years back, on a Saturday when Emma was still small enough to sit on it and hand me screws. Then I typed back 4 words. "Enjoy the trip." And I called my attorney. I know how that sounds. Cold. Maybe you're thinking a man should fight for his family, should call his wife screaming, should show up at the airport and make a scene. I didn't have it in me. 23 years teaches you that the fighting was already lost before the text ever came through. You just don't know it yet. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 59 years old. I run a small home renovation company outside Columbus, Ohio. And up until that morning, I would have told you I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one, a good one. The kind where you don't examine it too closely because examining it feels ungrateful. The suitcase was already packed and sitting by the front door. Blue hardshell, the one Melissa bought me 2 Christmases ago because she said my old duffel bag looked like something out of a war movie. Next to it, on the kitchen table, sat a manila envelope I hadn't zipped into any bag yet. Medical records, test results, a folder I'd been carrying around in my head for 3 months, waiting for the right moment on that boat to open it up and tell my wife I had Parkinson's. That cruise wasn't just a vacation. It was supposed to be my retirement trip. The first time in years the whole family would be together, away from work schedules and grandkids' soccer games, and every excuse we'd used for a decade not to sit still long enough to talk. I'd planned it for 8 months, spent close to $26,000 on 2 cabins, flights to Miami, a hotel the night before we sailed, shore excursions, a dining package, travel insurance with the kind of cancel for any reason clause you buy when you're the type of man who plans for what might go wrong. Darren had only been added to the group a few weeks earlier. The excuse was dinner. Emma wanted to have dinner with her real father before the trip. Just the 3 of them, nothing more. Then somewhere along the way, Melissa and Emma started talking about how Darren had never had a real family vacation, how he'd missed so much, how this could be a chance to give him something. I figured he'd come to the dock and wave us off. I actually pictured that, Darren standing there with his hands in his pockets while the rest of us walked up the gangway. That text told me otherwise. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't put a fist through the drywall, even though I could have fixed the drywall in 20 minutes flat. I just stood in my kitchen and looked at that blue suitcase by the door, and I thought about something that had never occurred to me quite so clearly before. For 23 years, I was the man they called when the car wouldn't start, when the rent was short, when somebody needed a ride to the ER at 2 in the morning. But the second a nicer seat opened up at the table, I became the man who could be left behind. Melissa texted again. "Please don't make this difficult. Emma has waited her whole life for this." I read that line 3 or 4 times. And here's the thing that got under my skin. Emma hadn't waited her whole life for Darren. She'd had me her whole life. But in the story they were telling themselves, the years I'd actually been there for didn't seem to count for much anymore. I called Arthur Bennett. He's been my attorney for almost 20 years, ever since I started the company, and he's heard me ask for a lot of things: contract reviews, liability questions, the occasional dispute with a supplier. He'd never heard me ask for this. I didn't tell him I wanted revenge. I'm not built that way, and honestly, in that moment, revenge wasn't even the word in my head. I told him, I want to know exactly what's mine, what's hers, and how I walk away from this without breaking a single law. Arthur told me to slow down, not to act on anger. I told him I've had 23 years to get to this decision. There's nothing impulsive about it. That part surprised even me, saying it out loud, because it was true. I'd been quietly thinking about downsizing for over a year. I'd had the house appraised. I knew, because I'd checked, months before any of this, that the house was mine. I bought it before Melissa and I got married, and our prenup had spelled it out plainly. Separate property. When I refinanced a few years back, she'd signed papers waiving any claim tied to that. I hadn't done it because I distrusted her. I'd done it because a good contractor plans for the roof leaking before it rains. So when Arthur asked if I was sure, I realized the honest answer was that some part of me had been sure for a long time. That text just took the decision out of the maybe pile. I opened the account where I'd booked the trip. I couldn't get back what I'd already spent. Not all of it, anyway. But I could stop what hadn't happened yet. I canceled my own cabin, pulled the shore excursions booked under my name, cut off the supplemental card, withdrew as guarantor on the remaining balance. I hit the first button. My phone lit up almost instantly. Melissa's name filling the screen. I turned it face down on the counter and didn't pick it back up. By the time their plane left Columbus, they still believed they had replaced one passenger. They had no idea they had just lost the man holding the entire trip and their entire life together. I couldn't cancel the whole trip. Melissa and Emma had booked their own cabins separately back before Darren was even part of the conversation, so their tickets were untouchable from where I sat. But plenty of it, the dining package, the shore excursions, the hotel deposit before departure, had been booked under my name, paid through my accounts, with balances still sitting open. I canceled what could be canceled, stopped paying on what couldn't. The travel insurance clawed back a decent chunk, though nowhere near everything. I'm not going to pretend I didn't wince a little watching those numbers. $26,000 doesn't disappear painlessly for anybody, retired contractor or not. But there was something almost freeing about it too. I knew I'd lose some money. For the first time in a long while, I was willing to pay for the privilege of no longer being used. Melissa called from the airport. Once, twice, 6 times. The text started sweet. "Daniel, please, let's just talk," and turned sharp fast. "Daniel, the hotel says your card was declined. Did you freeze the travel account? This is embarrassing." Embarrassing. That was the word she reached for. Not hurt, not confused. Embarrassing, like I'd shown up underdressed to a dinner party. Emma's text came a few minutes later. "You don't have to punish everyone just because you're upset." I read that one twice, sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt about 4 sizes too big. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she ask why I was upset in the first place, only that my being upset was inconvenient for the people it was inconveniencing. I answered her only once. "You wanted a trip with your real father. It should be paid for by the family you chose to take." I didn't hear back after that. Darren ended up covering the shortfall with his own credit card, grudgingly from what I gathered later. They still went, and for a few days I think they told themselves they'd weathered my little tantrum and everything would go back to normal once they got home. I want to tell you about 3 moments, because listing 23 years of sacrifice would take all night. And honestly, 3 is enough to understand the shape of it. The first, Emma was 7, running a fever that wouldn't break, the dead of a Columbus winter. Melissa was working a night shift at the hospital. I called Darren, this was back when he still occasionally answered, and got nothing. So I sat on the edge of her bed, changing out cool washcloths, and around 1 in the morning, I drove her to the ER myself. When she came out of the fog of a fever that had finally started dropping, she grabbed my finger with her whole little hand and said, "Don't leave, Daddy." First time she ever called me that. The second, her college graduation. I'd covered the last stretch of tuition after she lost a scholarship one semester. Never made a thing of it, just paid it and moved on. Darren showed up late with an expensive bracelet and somehow ended up in every photo. When the photographer said, "Let's get one with the parents," Emma pulled her mother and Darren in close. I stood off to the side, holding her graduation gown over my arm like a coat check attendant. The third, Father's Day, just last year. Emma posted a long tribute to Darren online. "No matter how much time we lost, you'll always be my dad." On the kitchen counter, she left me a card. It said, "Daniel, thanks for always helping." Not Dad, just a guy who helps out. I sat with that a long time before I ever brought it up to Arthur. I went into his office and told him what I wanted. Prepare separation paperwork. Cut off shared account access. Confirm the house title was clean the way I remembered it. Move forward on the sale I'd been quietly circling for over a year. Arthur leaned back and asked, "Do you want her to come back before we move forward with any of this?" "She made her decision before she boarded," I said. He slid a folder across the desk. "There's one thing you need to understand before you sign anything. This isn't a statement. This is your life changing." I picked up the pen. My right hand shook. Just a little, just enough that the signature came out crooked at the tail end of the L. Arthur noticed. His eyes flicked up to mine and back down, and he didn't say anything, which I appreciated more than he probably realized. I pulled my hand back for a second, steadied it against my knee. That's another reason I can't wait, I told him. He didn't ask what I meant, not yet, but I could tell the question was sitting right behind his teeth, and I knew before long I'd have to answer it. For him, and eventually for everyone else too. 3 months before any of this happened, I sat in a neurology office on the east side of Columbus, in one of those rooms with the too bright lighting and a poster of the human nervous system taped slightly crooked on the wall. The doctor had a kind face and a direct way of talking, which I appreciated even as I hated every word. The symptoms are still mild, he said, but you need to start planning for the years ahead, not just the next few months. Parkinson's, early stage. I'd noticed the signs myself before he ever said the word out loud, my hand trembling slightly around a coffee cup, my handwriting shrinking down on invoices until my office manager started asking if I needed new glasses. A stiffness in my joints most mornings that coffee didn't touch. A little unsteadiness coming down the basement stairs that I chalked up to getting older until it happened one too many times to ignore. I hadn't told Melissa, not because I didn't trust her. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I put that weight on her too. I wanted facts, not fear. The cruise was going to be when I told her, told both of them actually, sat Emma down too, because a diagnosis like that touches everybody in a family, whether they want it to or not. I'd packed for it. New medication tucked into a toiletry bag. Treatment paperwork folded into the manila envelope. A list of questions I wanted to walk through with them. A separate sheet, handwritten, listing modifications the house might eventually need. Grab bars, maybe a stair lift down the road, wider doorways if it ever came to that. I wasn't afraid of the disease itself. Not exactly. What scared me was becoming a burden. I'd watched my own father lose pieces of himself after a stroke, watched a man who used to fix everything with his hands slowly need help buttoning his own shirt. I knew what it did to a man's sense of himself, needing that kind of care. I thought Melissa and Emma would be my people through that. I really did. That text about Darren being Emma's real father cracked something open in me, and what spilled out was this. They still saw me as the man who served the family, not a man who might someday soon need the family to serve him back. A few months before the trip, Melissa had noticed my hands shaking over dinner and asked, "Are you sure you're ready to retire? You get restless when you're not working." She never asked about my health. She asked about the schedule, about the routine that might shift under her. I didn't hold it against her then. Looking back now, I understand I'd been ignoring a lot of small signals for a long time, telling myself they didn't mean what they clearly meant. Here's the moment that really turned things for me. While they were on the ship, Melissa accidentally left a voicemail running while talking to Darren. Must have hit call instead of hang up, because it recorded almost 2 full minutes of their conversation and landed in my inbox that evening. Her voice came through easy, almost amused. "He'll calm down. Daniel always does. He likes being needed." Darren asked, "And if he doesn't?" She laughed. "He won't walk away from the house. He built his whole life around taking care of us." That line did more damage than any insult could have, because she wasn't wrong about who I used to be. She understood me completely. She just only understood the parts of me she could use. I went back to Arthur's office and signed everything. House sale authorization, separation paperwork, beneficiary changes, revoked access on several accounts, a plan to move a portion of what I had into a scholarship fund for trade students, something I'd been quietly mulling for years. My hand shook through every signature. I didn't try to hide it this time. Arthur asked, "Does Melissa know about the diagnosis?" "No." "Are you going to tell her?" I looked down at my signature, no longer as straight as it used to be. I was going to tell my family. I'm no longer sure I had one. He told me the house sale itself would take roughly 3 weeks to fully close, not a matter of days like I'd hoped. "That's fine," I said, "and they'll be gone 11 days. The rest can happen through your office while I'm not standing in the middle of it." The cruise wasn't long enough to erase 23 years of marriage. It wasn't long enough to undo the version of myself that had spent 2 decades making sure everyone else was taken care of first. But it was long enough to stop protecting the people who had made it clear, in 4 short sentences on a Tuesday morning, that protecting them had never once been mutual. Truth is, I'd been circling the idea of selling the house for over a year before that text ever came through. Emma was grown and gone. The place was too big for 2 people, let alone 1. The stairs worried me more with every passing month, given what the doctor had said about balance issues down the road. And the upkeep on a house that size didn't make much sense for a man about to retire on a fixed income, even a comfortable one. I'd already had a preliminary appraisal done, already talked with a local cash buyer who'd shown interest a while back, already had the title pulled and reviewed, already had my separate property documentation organized in a folder in my filing cabinet, because Arthur likes things organized, and frankly, so do I. That text didn't create a plan. It just ended my hesitation about using one I already had. I accepted an offer about 8% under market value in exchange for a clean, fast close. 18 days, no repairs required, no months of strangers walking through my kitchen while I stood outside pretending not to watch. 18 days meant I could be quiet about the whole thing before anyone got home. Arthur's office handled the notifications properly. Email, certified mail, digital copies of every document, a clear timeline for Melissa to arrange her belongings. It was all above board. Nothing sneaky about it. Melissa saw the subject line of that first email while she was still on the ship. She told me later she assumed it was just me trying to scare her into calling. She never opened it. She texted instead, "We'll talk when I get home. Don't do anything childish." I didn't answer that one either. When the movers came, I want to be clear about something. I didn't throw anything away, didn't hide anything, didn't touch a single item that wasn't mine to touch. A professional moving company packed Melissa's clothes, Emma's belongings still scattered around her old room, photo albums, kitchen items Melissa had picked out over the years. Everything went into a storage unit, paid 6 weeks in advance. What I kept for myself was small: my father's old toolbox, a photograph of Emma at 7 years old, a worn-down carpenter's pencil I'd had since I started the company, a wooden chair I built with my own hands back when the business was just me and a truck, my medical file. That was about it. I left the big furniture behind since the buyer had agreed to take it as part of the deal. Easier that way, cleaner. There was one moment that got me, though. I walked into what used to be Emma's room, empty now except for the pencil marks still on the door frame, age 7, age 10, age 13, heights climbing up the wood in my own handwriting. Next to the last one I'd written, "Taller than Dad soon." I ran my thumb over that line, but didn't take a picture of it. Some things don't need to be carried out the door to still be real. They just live where you left them. My neighbor Carl came out while the moving truck was loading. Known him almost as long as I've lived on that street. "Melissa know about this?" he asked, nodding at the truck. "Her attorney does. Her email does. Whether she knows depends on whether she bothered to read it," I told him. He asked where I was headed. "Somewhere with 1 floor and fewer rooms to feel lonely in," I said. And I meant it as a joke, mostly. I found a small rental near Buckeye Lake. 1 story, a little porch out front, close enough to my doctor's office that appointments wouldn't eat my whole day. Room enough in the garage for my father's toolbox and an old fishing boat I'd been meaning to fix up for years. I changed my main phone number and kept one email open, strictly for Arthur. The last thing I did before handing over the keys was set an envelope on the kitchen counter. Not a stunt, not a parting shot. Inside was the storage unit address, copies of the legal paperwork, enough cash to cover 2 weeks in a hotel, and a letter I'd write more of later. I locked the door one final time and handed the keys to the new owner, a young guy with 2 kids and a dog barking in his car. He shook my hand and thanked me. I told him to take care of the place, and I meant that too. I didn't leave them with nothing. I left them with every legal notice, every personal possession, and every chance to take responsibility for what came next. What I stopped leaving them was me. While I was signing over keys in Columbus, the 3 of them were still out at sea, and for a few days, at least from the outside, everything looked exactly like what Emma always said she wanted. Poolside drinks, a nice dinner with white tablecloths, a photo of Emma standing between her mother and Darren captioned, "The family trip we should have had years ago." I didn't go looking for any of it. Carl sent me one picture before catching himself and apologizing. "Don't send me any more," was all I told him, and he didn't. But cracks show up fast when the person holding things together steps away, and Darren, as it turned out, had never been the one holding anything together in that family. Ever. He'd covered the overflow charges with his credit card, but the complaining started almost immediately after. He avoided the dinner tabs when he could, refused to pay for the ship's internet package, told Emma she ought to cover her own shore excursions, got visibly irritated when Melissa brought up, gently, what their living situation might look like once they got home. One night at dinner, Emma brought up a memory from when she was 12. A hospital stay, 3 days, a blur of fluorescent lights and beeping monitors. Darren smiled and said, "I remember that." "Which hospital was it?" she asked. He didn't know. I did. I'd slept on a plastic chair in that room for 3 nights straight. Melissa opened the email from Arthur's office on day 7 of the trip. She tried calling me. The number didn't connect. She called Arthur instead, and he told her calmly, "All communication should go through your attorney." She hung up rattled, but tried to keep it from Emma so it wouldn't ruin what was left of the cruise. Darren told her not to worry. "He's bluffing," he said. "Men like Daniel need people to take care of. He'll fold once you get home." That line landed strange on Melissa, though she couldn't quite place why at first. It was almost word for word what she'd said herself in that voicemail, that I'd never really walk away, that I'd built my whole life around needing to be needed. Hearing it come out of someone else's mouth, aimed at her this time, seemed to shift something. For the first time, I think she realized both of them had been looking at me the same way, like a man too soft to actually leave. Emma found out about the house by accident, catching sight of the paperwork open on her mother's phone. "He sold the house because we took Dad?" she said, sharp, angry. "Don't call Darren Dad like that right now," Melissa snapped back. Emma went quiet. It was the first time, I think, that the word had ever felt heavy in her own mouth. The first time she noticed that calling someone Dad wasn't free. It had weight. It had cost someone something all those years, and she was only now starting to understand who'd been paying it. Darren tried to smooth it over. "Your stepfather is trying to control you with money," he told her. Emma asked plainly, "Where are we supposed to live?" He gave her nothing. "We'll figure something out," he said. The kind of answer a person gives when they've never once had to actually figure something out for somebody else. That was, as far as I understand, the first time in Emma's whole life that Darren had been asked to produce a real solution to a real problem. Not a gift, not a nice dinner, an actual plan. He didn't have one. By the last night of the cruise, nobody was taking photos anymore. Darren slept apart from Melissa after an argument about money that apparently got loud enough that other passengers complained. Melissa stood out on the balcony that night, looking at the black water, and started to understand that the house really might be gone. What she still hadn't figured out, not yet, not by the time the ship pulled back into Miami, was that Darren had never intended to become the man she'd traded me in for. He'd only ever intended to be the man who showed up for the good parts. They flew back into Columbus on a Tuesday afternoon. Darren came along mostly because Melissa had pushed him into it. She wanted him there to help talk to Daniel, as if this were still a conversation that could be talked through. The cab turned onto the street I'd lived on for over 2 decades. Emma noticed first. "Mom, whose car is that?" A different car sat in the driveway. 2 kids' bikes leaned against the garage. New curtains hung in the front windows. The for sale sign, if there ever really needed to be one for a deal that fast, was long gone. Melissa ran to the door and tried her key. It didn't turn. A man she'd never seen before stepped out, calm, almost apologetic, and explained that he'd purchased the house legally and that closing had already been completed. Melissa called the police. When they arrived, they checked the paperwork, confirmed nothing illegal had happened, and asked her to step off private property that no longer belonged to her. There was no scene of furniture thrown onto the lawn. No locks changed in front of them out of spite. Everything they owned sat safely in a climate-controlled storage unit 40 minutes away, paid through the end of next month. It made me look prepared, not cruel. That distinction mattered to me, even from a distance. Melissa turned to Darren. We can stay with you until this gets sorted out. Darren lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and he said without much hesitation, my lease doesn't allow long-term guests. Not even me? Emma asked. I didn't say that, he backtracked. I just need some time. Time. That word again. The same word he'd been offering Emma her entire childhood, dressed up in new clothes. A man who identified himself as the new owner walked out with an envelope. Inside was the storage unit address and enough cash for a hotel stay. Melissa read the letter standing right there on what used to be our front lawn, Emma close beside her. Asterisk Melissa, asterisk, asterisk. You said Emma needed her real father, and I hope Darren becomes the man both of you believe he can be. Asterisk, I did not sell your home. I sold the house I bought before our marriage, maintained for 23 years, and had already planned to leave because my health is changing. Your belongings are safe in storage, paid through the end of next month. Arthur has included every document you need. Asterisk, I spent most of my adult life believing that being dependable would eventually make me family. Your message showed me that, in your eyes, I was still the man who could be set aside the moment someone more important came back around. Asterisk, I don't wish either of you harm, but I won't finance a life where I'm treated as temporary. Asterisk, take care of each other. Asterisk, Daniel asterisk. Melissa stopped on the line about her health changing. She thought back, my hands shaking at dinner, the way I'd started avoiding the basement stairs, the doctor's appointments I'd been vague about, the retirement cruise I'd planned so carefully. What does he mean about his health? Emma asked. Melissa didn't have an answer. For the first time in 23 years, they were both realizing I'd had an inner life they'd never bothered to ask enough questions to find. Darren tried to shift the blame. He planned this whole thing. This is manipulation. Emma turned on him, quiet but sharp. What medication was he taking? Darren didn't know. What doctor was he seeing? He didn't know that either. What did he do for work before he started his own company? Nothing. Darren had no answer. Emma realized, standing there on a lawn that used to be hers, that her father didn't just fail to know Daniel. He barely knew her either. What was the name of my elementary school? She asked him. He couldn't answer that one, and something in Emma's face changed permanently in that moment. Darren left not long after, citing some work matter that needed his attention. Melissa and Emma checked into the hotel room I'd paid for, and that night Emma sat on the edge of the bed holding an old photograph she'd pulled from a box in storage. Herself at 7, asleep on my shoulder after that hospital stay all those years ago. On the back, in my handwriting, asterisk, my girl is finally coming home. Emma broke down. He thought I was his. Melissa put a hand on her back. He didn't just think it, she said, he chose it. 4 months passed. I used part of the money from the house sale to start a trade scholarship fund at a community college on the west side of Columbus. Not for the recognition. I've hired plenty of young guys over the years who couldn't afford a welding certificate or an HVAC course, kids with real talent and no runway. I knew what a fair shot could do for somebody like that, because I'd been one of them once. They held a small announcement in a modest auditorium. I got invited up to say a few words about work, about responsibility, about the kind of life you build slowly, out of things that actually last. Melissa read about it in the local paper and came, Emma with her. Darren showed up too, mostly because Emma had asked him to. She wanted to see, she told him later, whether he was capable of showing up for something that wasn't easy or convenient. After I finished speaking, Melissa walked toward me through the small crowd. She didn't start yelling. Her voice was low, controlled. You had enough money to give strangers a scholarship, but you left your wife and daughter in a hotel. I left you storage, legal notice, and 2 weeks in a hotel, I said. What I stopped giving you was unlimited access to my life. She said I'd humiliated them. No, I told her. I stopped hiding the consequences of a decision you made in a text message out loud for anyone to see. Emma stepped closer. Dad, she said. I didn't turn cold. I looked at her a long moment before I spoke. I loved hearing you call me that when you were 7, I said. Her eyes filled. I was stupid. You were old enough to choose, I told her. That means you're old enough to understand what the choice cost. She asked me to come back, not to the marriage, just back into their lives, back to the way things were. I loved you like a daughter for 23 years, I said. But loving you doesn't require me to keep accepting whatever place you decide to give me. That's when Darren stepped in, like he had any right to. This has gone far enough. Emma has two fathers. I wasn't interested in arguing about biology. I just asked, what did she study in college? Wrong answer. What food couldn't she eat after her surgery at 12? Nothing. Emma asked him to stop, but he kept going, blaming Melissa for keeping him away all those years. Melissa answered that one right there in front of everyone. I called you for years, Darren. I had problems, he said. Emma looked at him, steady now. Daniel had problems too. He still came. That was really the moment it settled. Not some dramatic reveal, no scandal, no twist. Just a plain, quiet fact sitting out in the open where everyone could see it. Darren had a title. I had a history. And a title, it turns out, doesn't hold up a family by itself. Emma asked about my health, gently this time, like she actually wanted to know rather than needed something from me. I told her the truth. Parkinson's early stage, manageable for now, treatment already underway. Melissa's response came fast. Then let us help you. You don't get to become my caregivers because you feel guilty, I said. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in one conversation on a sidewalk. I didn't shut the door completely, though. I gave Emma an address, a P.O. box, not my home. Write to me, I told her. Don't ask for money. Don't ask me to fix anything. Just tell me who you are when you need nothing from me. She nodded, tears running, and I turned back toward the students waiting to take pictures with the man who'd helped fund their certificates. I caught Emma's face out of the corner of my eye, watching me stand among those young people who knew exactly what I'd done for them and why. I think that was the first time she really saw me. Not as the man who fixed things for her family, but as a man on his own, standing on his own 2 feet, worth something apart from what he could provide. A year went by. I'm still living in that little house near Buckeye Lake. Life isn't perfect there. Some mornings my hand shakes worse than others. Some days the medication leaves me foggy and slow, and I've had to learn, the hard way, how to actually accept help instead of just giving it. There are evenings when the quiet in that house gets loud enough to ache, but it's a different kind of quiet than I expected. It doesn't feel like loneliness anymore. It feels more like room to breathe. These days, I go to physical therapy twice a week. I mentor a handful of the trade students through the scholarship program. Nothing formal, just coffee and honest conversation about work and life. Carl and I fish together most months, same as always. I still tinker in the garage, fixing small things that don't really need fixing, just because my hands like the work. I've learned to build my schedule around what my body can handle instead of around everybody else's needs. I'm not a healthier man than I was a year ago, and I'm certainly not a richer one. But I stopped being afraid that love had to be purchased. That's worth more than either of those things. Melissa moved into a small apartment across town and picked up more hours at work. She's not struggling, exactly, but for the first time in a long while, she's had to build her own budget, pay her own bills, call her own repairman when something breaks. Not every problem in her life has a Daniel attached to it anymore. She sent me a letter a few months back. No demands in it, no request to get back together, just an apology, plain and unadorned. I wrote back and told her I forgave her. I also told her clearly that the marriage was over. Both things were true at once, and I've come to believe they usually are. Darren drifted out of Emma's life again once she stopped looking at him like something out of a dream. This time she didn't chase after him. She told me once that wanting to know her birth father was never the mistake. The mistake was treating a man who'd shown up every single day for 23 years, like something she could trade in whenever a better offer walked through the door. Emma writes to me regularly now. The early letters were full of apology, and I answered those politely, nothing more. Eventually, she stopped writing about the past and started telling me about her actual life, her job, a class she was taking, some volunteer hours she'd put in at the trade program, the small ways she was trying to be a more responsible person day to day. After several months of that, I agreed to meet her for coffee. She didn't call me Dad right away. She just said, "Thank you for meeting me, Daniel. Thank you for coming without asking me to fix anything," I told her. It wasn't some movie reunion, it was just a small, honest start. Back home that evening, I opened my father's old toolbox, the one I'd carried with me from that house to this one. The photo of Emma at 7 was still tucked inside, a little worn at the corners now. I didn't throw it away. I never will. Forgiving someone doesn't mean pretending the love you had for them wasn't real. But I didn't set it on my nightstand either. It stayed right there in the box, alongside the other things that belong to a life I've already lived through. For most of my life, I believed love meant staying, no matter how little of yourself was left by the end of the day. I know better now. Sometimes love means walking away before resentment turns you into somebody you don't recognize in the mirror. They thought I disappeared to punish them. The truth is simpler than that. I disappeared because for the first time in 23 years, I finally understood my life belonged to me too. Forgiveness opened the door back up. Boundaries are what decide how far it gets to open. If you've ever had to step away from somebody you love just to hold on to your own sense of self, I genuinely like to hear what that taught you. Thanks for sticking with me through this one, and take good care of yourself out there.